Welcome to the 2026 edition of Cybersecurity and Privacy Guide for Home Users. I know we're still technically in 2025, but we're close enough to 2026. Pretty much all this information is going to carry over into the next year. I'd given it quite a bit of thought about what I wanted to include in this video, and it's going to be pretty comprehensive. We're going to go ahead and get started because this is all of the stuff that we're going to be covering today, so we have a lot to get through. I know I've been gone for the past year. I am coming back to the channel. I'm going to be involved in making videos again, doing privacy and cybersecurity related stuff. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Let me know if you have a video you want to see pop up. Today's video is going to be an intro to these topics. We're not really going to get into the weeds on anything in particular. That's what upcoming videos are going to be about. Today, I just want to give people who might be new to this topic a good overview of what to expect over the next year or two as things really start to change on the privacy and cybersecurity front, in case you guys missed it. The UK just recently has said that they are going to mandate digital IDs. You will no longer be able to work at a job if you do not have a digital ID. My understanding was this was never presented to Parliament. This was just something that was forced through. I could be wrong about this. I don't keep super up to date on European politics, but privacy is going to be a much bigger topic from this point forward. It's not just about security anymore. It's not just, well, I don't want to get a virus or get malware on my computer. It's, what do I need to do to protect myself against the corporate and government spying where they are overreaching into everything about people's personal lives? And what you'll see as I start going through this, privacy and cybersecurity can diverge on some points, and at some points they are mutually beneficial to each other. For example, if you encrypt your email, that improves privacy and security because people can't snoop on your stuff if it's end-to-end encrypted and for some reason your email provider were to get hacked. Well, the bad guy can't just open up and start reading through your emails. But then there's in some ways where it diverges, and I'll just give a really basic example here. If you are using Windows and you have antivirus installed, well, number one, Windows collects a lot of data and telemetry anyway. But the second aspect is that Windows, by having that antivirus, the antivirus, in order for it to work, really has to be able to see everything that's going on with your computer in order for it to do its job properly. And I think we're getting pretty close to the point. Windows 25 H2 is about to start rolling out this year. It's the end of September as I make this video. I think they're about a month or two away, and from what I've read with Windows 25 H2 is that they plan on building in and integrating AI a lot more. I know for a while there was discussion that Windows Recall wasn't really going to be turned on. It wasn't going to be forced on people, or at least some users, but it seems like that's not the case anymore, which I knew was going to happen. So I would say for the next year or two, you might still be okay privacy wise to continue to use Windows, but I really think at some point Windows users who are serious about privacy are going to have to make a decision whether they want to stay on Windows or they want to jump over, learn how to use Linux. I'm getting ready to switch all my stuff over to Linux for good, or BSD, one of the two. It'll just depend on what I can find for software that's going to suit my needs, that certain things don't work on Linux or BSD, so I've got to change things over. But I'll make videos about it, and I think it would cover the average user pretty well. Of course, there's always going to be the convenience option. Windows is the easiest. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start off with the most basic thing, cybersecurity guide for 2025. I should have put 2026 here because this is going to carry over into next year. I'm going to keep this simple. We're at the point where you can no longer just rely on, if you're on Windows running, let's say Kaspersky or Bitdefender, if you've got the entire security suite. I think it's called home internet security, where you get the firewall, you get antivirus, you get ransomware protection, all that kind of stuff. It's good and everything, but we're getting to the point where that's really becoming the bare minimum because these hackers and scammers are getting so good that they are, and I'm going to give you some examples here later on in the video, but it's getting to the point where they are getting so good where they can social engineer their way into people's computers or social engineer people into handing over money, which is really what most of the scammers just want is just money. Most of them don't really care as much unless it's a large hacking group or a state-sponsored hack. They don't really care all that much about taking over your computer. They just want money. But anyway, there's no such thing as 100% secure. As we start going through stuff on this slide here, I just want people to keep in mind, it doesn't matter if you have the best software and the best security software in the world. If you are still making really bad decisions as far as their security and privacy, the best software cannot save you. There's the old saying that I think it goes, problem exists between keyboard and chair, basically meaning that the user, this is relevant today. It's as relevant as it ever has been, especially with social media, where people are just, it seems like a lot of people just don't really care about this stuff. They throw information out there. They don't really care what's going on, and that's that. The other thing to point out, I've already talked about privacy and security. Anonymity is an interesting topic because true anonymity is basically impossible these days. If you want to get really any real use out of the internet, let's say email, general browsing, buying things, you're not going to ever have 100% anonymity. There are options like Whonix. If you haven't heard of it, it's WHONIX. It's a Tor-based Linux distribution. Excellent distro, by the way. But there are some things that just you can't really get a good level of anonymity really these days. What I'm going to focus more on is privacy and security. I'll cover anonymity in later videos. There are things you can do to enhance it, but also as I said before, this is going to focus more on general overviews rather than, we're not going to go into any particular operating system. This stuff is relevant whether you're running iPhones, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, all of that applies here. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to sound obvious, but passwords and two-factor authentication are becoming much more important. I still see like every probably a couple months, security researchers will go through the most recent password breaches, and they are still finding that things like ABC123 or 123456 are still the most common passwords that are out there. I don't know why people are doing this to themselves. Oh, well, my account got hacked. Well, I wonder why. It's a weak-ass password. There's no two-factor authentication, and then these are also people that click into random weird websites with no sort of idea. They don't have an ad blocker. They're clicking on random links. It's a huge problem. So password managers range from free to low cost. Man, I'm telling you guys, they're worth their weight in gold. If you're looking for locally hosted, free, and you are looking for something where you're going to have to learn the software if you want to use this, is KeePass. The reason that I say you're going to have to learn it, there's no cloud hosted option. It's not like just firing up 1Pass, which I'm sure some people watching this probably use. KeePass, you have to properly manage everything. You have to keep your seeds backed up. Or in this case with KeePass, you get a database file. You don't want to just be backing this up unencrypted onto something like OneDrive or Google Drive. Like, granted, you still got to be able to put in your password to get access to it. You don't want to just be storing it anywhere. You want to make sure you're doing this properly. I'll have a written guide where I have a little more stuff. That's the other thing, is these videos, where applicable, are now going to start including written guides. I'll have that down in the comment section, and I will also link it in the description as well because it's relevant to this video. But KeePass, if you're willing to learn it a little bit, great option. If you're looking for free, but you want to either locally host or you want something that is cloud hosted, so basically on Bitwarden servers, Bitwarden is a great option. You can spend $10 a year. It gets you a few extra features. Emergency access, I think, is one of them. You don't really need to pay for it, though. You can just use it. I believe you don't have to pay for it to use it across multiple platforms. Great option. If you're fine with closed source, which I am more and more preferring large open source projects, but if you want to use closed source, that's okay. 1Password is a good option. The thing with 1Password, it's, I think, about $40 a year at this point. It is closed source. And the other thing is 1Pass gives you something called a secret key. The thing with that secret key is make sure you don't lose it. If you lose it, you're going to lose access to your account. There is a way where if you've logged on to another device previously and you have access to that device, you can go put in your password and be able to log into there. But let's say you use 1Pass, you don't back up your secret key. For some reason, you lose your device, but you have your password, but you need to start over and reinstall it somewhere else. If you don't have that secret key, you're not getting in. So just be aware of that if you choose 1Pass. Next thing, two-factor authentication. I'm going to make videos, by the way, doing more in depth, going through actually setting this stuff up. Like I said, we're going to try and keep this generalized because we have a lot of material to cover in this video. Two-factor authentication. This is pretty much a requirement these days, guys. I mean, for any of your accounts, you really should be running this stuff. If you have the option, so I put SMS, this is text messaging, two-factor authentication. Some places do not have the option of using something called a time-based one-time password app. That is something like Google or Microsoft Authenticator. Some places still make you use phones. That's not ideal. If you can not use a phone, that's what I would recommend. If you do have to use one, what I would recommend is talking to your mobile carrier to see if you can do either, someone will do like a passcode or a PIN lock, which will prevent something called a SIM swap attack. You don't want to have happen, because this has happened to people before, is a determined attacker knows the phone number of somebody, let's say that they know is a cryptocurrency investor or something like that. Well, they can use social engineering to take over someone's phone number and gain access to all of their accounts. What happens is they can go to the phone carrier, convince them that they are this other person, and get that phone number, and you lose access to all your stuff. I don't like SMS 2FA. If you can avoid it, that's great. Few different options with this one. Aegis is Android only, good option. 2FAS is Android and iOS. And you also have the option of using browser extensions. With 2FAS, the thing to keep in mind is the way they back up their seeds is to your cellular provider's cloud. So like if you are on iOS, for example, they will back it up to the iCloud. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but you're placing trust in basically a company that data farms people. I don't hate Apple products. I wouldn't say they're as bad as Google, but Apple and Google absolutely do farm people's data. Just something to be aware of. If you want a cloud option where they store the seeds on their servers, so you don't have to have a separate backup if you don't want to, is Ante Authenticator. They have a Photos app. They also have their Authenticator app. It's Ante Auth is what their app is called. Pretty solid option. And then, of course, you have your big tech names that are out there: Google, Microsoft Authenticator, Authy. Personally, I recommend avoiding these. If you are using Authy right now, I would recommend getting away from that. The reason being is that they shut down their desktop app a while ago, and I don't like recommending stuff to people that it's looking like they aren't wanting to put as much effort into supporting things. As far as the desktop app goes, I don't think that's a big deal. By the way, Ante Authenticator does have a desktop app. You could download this to Windows if you want to and use it as a desktop app. The thing I would caution people about is if you do get malware on your computer, and it's not just Authenticator. Let's say you have a software wallet for cryptocurrency on your computer or anything like that. You get malware on there, that's where it becomes a big problem. So that's just something to be aware of. It's better to keep things like a two-factor authentication app on your phone, because the way Google or the way Android and iOS work is they do a good job of sandboxing all of the apps. It gives a little bit of extra security. The other thing that I want to mention just real quick, if these are really the apps that I would suggest if you're going to use any one of these, when you go Google or when you go into like the Android store or the iOS store, be careful about the different apps that are out there. If you type in two-factor authentication, a lot of times you will get apps in the results that have like 10 reviews. They're from some random developer. Maybe it's legitimate software, maybe it's not. But this is one of those things when it comes to privacy and security software, you really want to vet this stuff and make sure it's legitimate. You want to be careful with this because you can lose your ass on this stuff if you use a malicious app. There's been plenty of stories, especially with the Google Play Store, about how malicious apps were downloaded millions of times. They were finally found out. People had their information stolen. Just something to be careful of. Make sure you're vetting your apps. The next thing I want to mention is make sure you have a backup. So let's say you have a phone that you have your 2FA and your password manager apps on. It's a good idea if you have like a backup phone or some other device where you can have those installed where they're ready to go if you lose access to, let's say, one of your devices. If you only have one device and that's all you can use, then that's okay. It's better than nothing. But it is a good idea to have a backup available if you have it. The other thing that's important, if you're going to switch providers, one of the reasons that I don't like recommending Authy to people is because, so let's say you want to switch from Authy to 2FAS. You cannot export your seeds from Authy unless they changed it in the past year or two, but it's been like that basically since they made the app, that you cannot export to another app. I think it's just one of those bad business practices where they want to try to lock people into their app. I don't like that kind of behavior. It's not ideal to be locked into something like that. It's better to go open source on this if you can. So I'll just give you a quick overview of password managers real quick. So if you've never used one before, basically all you do is you enter your master password into the password manager. Is the master password correct? If it's not, access is denied. If yes, it's going to retrieve your username and password. The reason I put here is the username and password correct, and is website legit or fake? If you go to a fake website, there's an issue with scam websites. It's something called typo squatting. So for example, in the case of Twitter, I don't know if this is probably a registered domain and probably belongs to a bad actor, but let's say you're typing something in on your keyboard, you're not really paying attention, and you type TWIITER.com. That would be an example of something that is a typo squatted domain. There's bad guys that sit on the other side of that. They capture your login details right away and they go log in. And meanwhile, you keep typing this in, you keep getting an error message. Oh, well, I thought I was typing this in properly. That is something that a password manager can protect you against, because it can tell, well, we're not on twitter.com, we're on TWIITER.com, and it won't have that autofill enabled. So if you notice that autofill is not working on a website, that is something you can look for. And it may be one of those things where if you see it come up, just check to make sure you are not on a fake website. Anyway, the rest of that stuff is pretty simple, straightforward. We're not going to get too much further into that. Let's go ahead and move on. The network security stuff is becoming a higher priority. What I would tell people is pick your network gear out. Pick it well. If you're a home user, you don't necessarily need to be paranoid and not buy, let's say, a piece of used hardware. I bought plenty of used hardware before. I've never had an issue with it. But for example, one thing to be careful of, let's say you want to go buy a used computer. If it comes with a hard drive, my personal advice would be get rid of the hard drive, get a new hard drive, because then you know that it has been tampered with. That's probably paranoid for a lot of people. In some cases, it could still be okay. That's not a risk I'm willing to take, but that's just something, if you're going to buy networking hardware or used computers or anything like that, just be careful with that stuff. It could be a problem. The other thing I mentioned, if you haven't heard of this before, CVEs, critical vulnerability exploits. These are issues that come up where bugs are found throughout the life of a product, whether it be a router or a motherboard or a processor. Spectre and Meltdown affected processors. We've covered in the past the Black Lotus BIOS malware. This is stuff where these updates get released and they fix these bugs. Typically, as long as you got a good vendor, they should be fixing these bugs. That's where the updates are important. As far as security settings go, I would say it's important to make sure you're changing the default stuff, the default admin login, pick a better password, harden your Wi-Fi password. You don't want to use something that's weak, like a six character piece of crap. Let's say it's just 3 numbers and 3 letters. It would be trivial for someone who really wanted to get into your network. The next thing I mentioned is rainbow tables. I'll just cover this real quick. Some of you have probably lived in big apartment buildings and you've seen 20, 30, 40 Wi-Fi networks pop up, and a couple of them will say something like FBI van. That's been a long running thing on the internet is, oh, well, name your Wi-Fi network Wi-Fi van, freak out your neighbors, make them think that the FBI is there. Here's where that's a problem. By the way, I'm going to give this just as a very, very high level explanation. We could get really into the weeds on this, but we got a lot of stuff to cover. That SSID is your network name. The reason that you want to choose something unique is that if you choose something common, let's say FBI van, that is something that an attacker can use something called a rainbow table, because your network name, when it comes to wireless security, your network name is used as a hash for your Wi-Fi password. If you're new to this stuff, some of it might be going over your head. That's okay. I'll get into this stuff in later videos. The problem is if you use a common SSID like the FBI van example, it doesn't matter if you have a strong password. An attacker could still, if they were determined and they really wanted to, they could get into your Wi-Fi network, get access to your router. It's a problem. Just be careful with that stuff. The other thing is vet devices before they're allowed on your network. I would say be careful of who you're letting use your computer, use your router. If they want to log into your Wi-Fi, maybe it'd be a good thing to just set up a temporary network, and then when they're done using it, delete it. It's a good idea to just be careful of this stuff. The problem with this is there's so many people out there that are careless. If you have good security and privacy practices and someone gets on your network and they're being careless, they're doing stupid stuff, it could compromise some of the privacy work that you've tried to do. So just something to be aware of. The other thing that I mentioned here, IPS and IDS, this is intrusion prevention system and intrusion detection system. If your hardware, and I should have put software here, if your hardware and software supports it, typically you got to have a somewhat decent, like a quad core CPU is usually good enough, couple gigs of RAM. There's something out there called OpenSense and also PFSense. It's about as close as you can get to price level network software that you can load onto your router. If you have this option, you can turn it on. I run it all the time on my network. I've done it for years. I think it's a good idea to just run it in the background. It will cost very little to no bandwidth to have it turned on, and it's just part of that layered approach to defending yourself against bad actors. If your device doesn't support it, by the way, there's no need to run out and spend $300 on a prosumer piece of hardware. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And then also segment devices on your network. This is something I would consider to be pretty important. So let me give you an example. Again, this is high level overview. We're not going to get into the weeds on this. Let's say you're running multiple Wi-Fi networks, ASUS, you've got Lord of the Pings, FBI Open Up. Let's say you've got a couple tablets and a laptop on this network. You've got 4 security cameras running on this network and your FBI Open Up. Let's say you're running, for some reason, you're running a smart fridge and a smart washer, for example. It's a good idea to segment this stuff. And what you'll see because I know some people that watch my channel want to get into computers, or like get into IT somehow. What you'll see when you get into a business or a government environment is they will segment the network for security reasons. So you could set up all these different networks. Again, this is just a really high level overview, but you can set up, let's say one department of a business has, let's say HR is all on their own network, and then let's say front desk people have their computers on another network. The idea of it is that it makes it harder if an attacker gets into one part of the network, they're going to have a harder time accessing other parts of the network. Again, I'm going to go back to what I've said before. Nothing's ever 100% secure, but generally speaking, that's how it would work. It's a good idea to just have everything separated out if you can. The next thing, social engineering and social media. I would say this is the number one issue we're facing right now. Network security is pretty high up there. I'd say 2 or 3. Social engineering and social media. I have seen this way too much. I'm going to say it. I would guess that if you're watching this video, you're the type of person that probably already knows this stuff, but I'll say it anyway. Don't be one of those people that's airing out dirty laundry on social media. Don't be doing those quizzes. This has been a huge problem on Facebook for years, and maybe on other social media platforms, but I know people do this kind of stuff on Facebook where quizzes get shared, and most of the time this is coming from bad actors. They will have these quiz questions questions, and they make it sound like, oh yeah, this is a really fun thing you can do with your Facebook friends. What year was I born? What's my favorite type of food? What was the first car that I drove? If you notice from what I'm saying, these typically are questions that you would see on security questions and answers for recovering user accounts. Or it will ask, do you have any vacations planned? And then people will start talking about their vacation plans, and then a bad guy is like, oh, okay, well, this person is going to be out of town this week. Let me go break into their house. This is the kind of stuff where I've seen too many people get into this and, oh, well, I'm going to do that. It's a bad idea. You're just giving data out for free to bad actors to be able to use. The next thing, cognitive biases. If you're not already familiar with these, I would say the two most common ones, you don't have to familiarize yourself with all biases. The two that I would say scammers like to use the most is number one, consistency bias, which is you want to be consistent with how you've behaved in the past. I'm not going to give a big psychology lecture here and get into the weeds on this, but let's say you are the type of person who always says yes to things, you always show up to a meeting, whatever, you always help people out, and then a scammer gets a hold of you and maybe they play on your heartstrings and, oh, well, I'm struggling right now and I need $1,000 wired to me and you seem like a really nice person. For some reason, some people do that stuff. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to wire money to this person because I think they have some kind of hardship, and meanwhile, they're just farming money from people. That's an example of the consistency bias. The other one that's used a lot by bad actors is the sunk cost fallacy. This has been happening a lot over the past couple of years, especially with job recruiting scams, where a scammer will make a person think that they have applied to a real company, and they will say, well, we need you to send in a couple $100, and then we'll send you a company laptop and a phone so you can start working at your new job. And, oh, okay, well, let me send the money. And then they send the money, and, okay, well, they sent us money. I bet we could scam them for more money. And they say, oh, well, actually, we're having this problem. There's been an issue with shipping. We got to send it out. Go ahead and send us another couple $100, and then we'll reimburse you on your first paycheck. That's an example of the sunk cost fallacy, where a person will dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole because they want to believe that they are going to have a good outcome. They want to believe that something is true when their intuition is probably telling them, oh, well, this is a scam. They just keep digging that hole deeper and deeper. That is an example of the sunk cost fallacy. Cognitive biases, if you can learn these, how they work, how hackers use them, you'll be pretty far ahead of the game compared to most people. Because that goes into my next point, that AI is allowing hackers to get really good at this stuff. I got a couple examples here we're going to take a look at, so I'm not going to really get into that too much, but this is what you're going to see a lot of scammers use now, is AI to come up with really good pretexts, really good social engineering to convince people to do stuff. The other thing that you're going to notice is some of these scammers are playing the long game. Again, I'm going to pull up an example here in just a moment. And then it comes down to just don't be clicking on random stuff. It seems pretty straightforward. Let's get into an example here. So this is a Twitter post. Guy said, watch out for this scam. A guy claimed he was from TechCrunch, reaching out asking if I was interested for an article. Seemed interesting, so I said, why not? That's when he sent a sus Google Calendar link that required me to authenticate Twitter. Even worse, even said the app could control every bit of my account. Watch out, guys. So this guy, instead of sending the generic, hey, I am a prince, I have $1 million to give you, these scammers are evolving. They're getting better. Said, hey, I appreciate you getting back to me. I'd love to get in a quick 15-minute pre-discussion with you and my team for a quick rundown of our plan. You can schedule a meeting at any time that suits you best. And then they send you what looks like a legitimate Google Calendar link. If a meeting is scheduled, kindly let me know so I could set a reminder. And then you see this, what comes up here is authorize Google Calendar to access your account. It has all this stuff. This is bad stuff here. These guys have really, there's something particular with this, and Google might have patched it by now. Something to do with Google Sites, where you can make a website on Google, but then you could send stuff to other people that would allow them to click this access account button. It would send a bunch of, I'd have to look it up again to get all the details. It was specific to Google Sites, but this is something you got to watch out for. This just happened a week ago, maybe, probably not even that long. Cancer patient got ripped off for $32K while raising money for his treatment by some scamming piece of garbage. During a fundraiser, the scammer joined the stream and got the victim to download a Steam game that was infected with info stealer malware, which then stole all of the funds out of his crypto wallet. So this game, Block Blasters, it started off as what you could call a legitimate Steam game. It had been uploaded, I think, in July. Oh, I guess it's right here. It was uploaded in July. This goes back to what I'm saying. These scammers are playing the long game, and sometimes they're waiting a year plus to spring the trap. It had been uploaded, people started using it, and then they uploaded a malicious update to the game where then it was stealing people's... it was like an info stealer. I don't know why Steam... My guess is Steam's probably going to crack down on this. This looked really bad for Steam that this happened. I don't know why Steam is not checking this stuff a little more closely. This is a good reminder that just because you have used a piece of software in the past and it was trusted does not mean that it is always going to be that case. But anyway, what happened is there was a good outcome. Some guy got a hold of him, sent him the $32K, and the scammer has been... One of the scammers, anyway, that I'm aware of has been identified. They have been publicly outed. Their pictures, name is out there. We got to start exposing these people because they are absolute scum. To do that to a cancer patient who's trying to raise money for treatment, and you got pieces of garbage like that. These people are completely unscrupulous, and you've got to step up your game because I can guarantee you they are playing the game pretty well. General insights. Let's get into data backups real quick. I'm not going to cover this too in depth. I'll make a video on this later. What I would say is if you are using OneDrive or you are using Google Drive, Dropbox, anything like that, I would recommend that you switch over to Proton Drive. There's File N from Germany. Proton is in Switzerland. Treseret is in Switzerland. There's a little bit of drama going on with Switzerland and privacy right now. I don't really know which way it's going to go. Proton is making preparations. That's kind of a topic for another video. I'm not going to get too far into that. If you value privacy and data security, though, this is important to consider this. Now, there's something called the 3-2-1 when it comes to backups. 3 backups of data, 2 locally, 1 of them offsite. So a lot of people are probably just doing the cloud backups. That's okay. It's good to have something local as well. So you could do external hard drive or USB drive. If you're going to do this, my recommendation is, again, use something like Proton. If you're going to use something like Google Drive or Dropbox, you can use some software called Cryptomator, which you can encrypt files locally before it gets uploaded, because if you use these services and you do not encrypt your files, it's part of the terms of service. You're agreeing to give them access to, and they will scan your files, which means they will pull sensitive personal data off of your files. Just something to be aware of. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into that. We'll cover that more in a later video. That's not the most important thing that's out there. VPNs. Let's cover this real quick. VPNs. There's been a lot of marketing these days. I've changed my mind on VPNs quite a bit since I first started the channel. As I've learned more about VPNs and as I've seen data collection continue to get worse, they do not provide anonymity, but they can give you an extra layer of privacy in some circumstances and if it's done properly. First of all, use a good provider. The only 3 that I recommend currently are iVPN, Molvad, and Proton. I think Proton here pretty soon is going to add an option where you can set up an account, pay with cryptocurrency instead of having to use, let's say, a credit card. I really don't think that's a good idea for VPNs. I don't know why it's taken Proton so long to get this done, but it sounds like they will support Monero some point before the end of the year. Enough people signed a petition that they said they were going to put it on a roadmap. We'll see if they get it done. It would be great if they did. There's also, I've seen a lot of people recommending NIM, VPN, NYM. I'm going to make a video on them probably at some point down the road. There's a few things before I recommend NIM that they need to work on development wise. It's looking pretty promising, but for the time being, it's those 3 providers are the ones that I really recommend. They do have encrypted DNS built in, which does come with some security benefits. I'm not going to get into that. It's a long topic, but if you go back on my channel to like 5 or 10 videos back, I made a video called Using DNS as a Firewall. Encrypted DNS has some good benefits to it. Not so much privacy, but definitely from the security aspect, it is good. The other thing, it is anytime you're using a network that you do not have full control of, I think that using a VPN is pretty much critical at that point. feel free to do what you want. But if you're going to be using things like coffee shop Wi-Fi networks, I think it's a really good idea to be using one, but it's up to the individual. Some people might not have the $10 a month to pay for a VPN. If that's the case, you work with what you got. So this is, if you're new to VPNs and you kind of want to have an overview again, this is just a very high level. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much. This is a high level overview of VPNs. So let's say this is your computer. This is your real IP address. You connect to, let's say, Molvad VPN. This is the IP address that is assigned to you. And then you go to your requested site. 8.8.8.8 is Google, but it could be any IP address of whatever website that you want to visit. The thing that's important to understand if you're new to VPNs, the VPN provider does have your IP address. This is why it is so important that you pick a good provider. There's been a few VPN providers in the past that were caught logging information of their customers. That's why I'm very particular about who I recommend. I don't recommend just picking any provider that's out there because there are some really shady VPN providers. But basically, this is your encrypted VPN tunnel. Your VPN provider can see all of the websites that you're visiting. That's why, and they can see your real IP. This is why it's so important to be able to trust the VPN that you are using. The requested site cannot see your VPN IP as long as your real IP doesn't leak. The reason that I mentioned this is because there are some cases where it can leak. You can have DNS leaks, which VPNs have gotten pretty good about this. This shouldn't really be an issue these days with VPNs. You can have an IP leak through something called WebRTC. Be careful with this on the Google Chrome browser. If you're using Firefox, you have to make sure, if you just go Google this, you'll find out about it. Make sure you are careful with Firefox because that WebRTC, it does have a use. It's used for things like Jitsi, for example. If you want to open up a web browser, go to Jitsi and have a video call over your browser with someone else. That's where WebRTC comes into play. The problem with it is it can leak your real IP address. If you don't have any use for that stuff and if you want to mask your IP address, make sure you're turning off WebRTC. Some browsers, Brave comes with it disabled out of the box, I think. Make sure you double check that. Molvad and LibreWolf are forks of Firefox that are pretty hard, and they come with that disabled by default. By the way, excellent browsers, LibreWolf and Molvad browser. But anyway, the way this works, you connect to the VPN, you request the connection to the site, VPN forwards it, you get your response, and you get your data. Very high level overview. There's a lot of other stuff happening here that I wasn't going to put in here, but just so people can see. DNS queries also get routed through VPN. Any good VPN these days will have their own DNS servers for the purposes of resisting fingerprint data collection. It's a good idea to just use the DNS servers that come with your VPN, but you could use different DNS servers if you want to. That is an option. But let's go ahead and move on here. The basics of encryption. I'm going to make and I'm not exaggerating this, guys. This really is a super technical topic. I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like. Make sure before you start using encryption on anything, whether you encrypt with CryptoMator or PicoCrypt or VeraCrypt or BitLocker or the Linux Unified Key System, which is the Linux, you can go and turn that on when you are setting up a distro to turn on full disk encryption for Linux. Make sure you understand the application of encryption. You don't have to know all the math and all that stuff behind it. It's very math focused, encryption is. What you do have to understand is how to apply it correctly. If you don't understand all of the stuff correctly and you do something wrong, you absolutely will, I guarantee it, lose your data. Anything that was encrypted, if you make a misstep and you don't do something properly, that data is gone. You will not get it back. So let me just get this. We'll go through some misconceptions here. The video is an example of how misinformed people are on the matter. I don't know why I didn't link the video here, but you can go find where people are talking. I think the one that I was going to pull up in reference is we've been seeing some higher profile examples of people in the media over the past couple of years where they go commit a major crime. And there was one newscast that I saw specifically talking about this where they said, well, this person had encrypted emails overseas, and why did they have that? We need to crack down on this. This is bad actors who are playing into people's emotions because they are serving a specific agenda, that agenda being that they are trying to pull control of people's privacy and data away so government and big tech can control it. Encryption is absolutely important. Having encrypted communications stored overseas could be as simple as, well, I just use a Proton email address. But you can see how when it's phrased differently, how politicians or these big tech stooges make it sound like it's something evil that's being used for nefarious purposes. Okay, maybe it is, but that doesn't mean that people need to have their privacy stripped away from them because some bad actors use it. But anyway, I could go into a big rant about that. I'll get into the details of encryption again on a later video. But the thing that I would say is, number one, all critical data should be encrypted. What I mean when I say the world wouldn't function without it is, so let's go back to what I was just saying about how bad actors want this taken away from the hands of the people. You see this in places like the UK with the Online Safety Act, where they want to see things like Signal, build-in backdoors where the government can access it. Well, then it's not encryption, because then anybody can go in, a bad actor, a hacker, a nation state actor can go in, snoop on everyone's communications. That's not encryption. To me, encryption is end-to-end encrypted. I am the only one who has access to it. That is the only way that you can really define true encryption, because the problem is let's take Google Drive, for example. Yeah, that data is encrypted if you upload it, but Google holds the keys. They can go decrypt your data, and they actively do, by the way. Go read the terms of service and the privacy policy. They snoop through your files. Well, that's not really encrypted then, is it? If anybody can go read it, it should only be you that has access to it. Snowden revealed what really happens with these privacy abuses. You could go read his book. I'm trying to remember what his book's name was called. It was a pretty good read. I'd recommend it. It was pretty good on the whole detail of what happened with his story. But what I mean when I say the world wouldn't function without it is, these big tech companies, all these guys are saying, well, it's okay for us to have it. It's okay for Google to have it because that's essential for them to run their business and not have their whole business shut down, have all their sensitive company IP taken. It's sensitive for banking operations, so banks can run all their transactions in the back end and not have bad actors take stuff. Well, why is it okay for them to have it, but yet governments and corporations from around the world are saying that private citizens should not be able to have encryption? Again, I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but kind of the way that I look at it. So let me go through a quick process of what this looks like for BitLocker. This is why I'm saying if you're going to use this, just be aware of the intricacies of it. This is a basic overview of how BitLocker works if you're going to turn it on. And if you're going to do it, ideally, you would go into group policy to harden it. I don't necessarily like the default BitLocker settings. So if we're going to do this really the right way, but let's say you want to enable BitLocker. Okay, so it's going to check hardware. In BitLocker, by default, will ask you when you go to turn it on, hey, can I run this hardware check and make sure that your hardware is compatible? Let's say you have no trusted platform module, either it's not on your motherboard or you don't have the firmware option that's built into a lot of processors these days, whether it's Ryzen or I think the 9th or 10th gen Intel processors and newer. And I think it was Ryzen, either the 1000 or 2000 series, where they started integrating the firmware TPUs or TPMs, excuse me. So non-TPM, if no, then use USB or password, prepare and set password. This is how it used to work back in the day. I used to have a computer that didn't have a TPM, and so then I would just set a password, and BitLocker would say, okay, we'll set your password, save your recovery key. If the computer does have TPM, BitLocker by default says, okay, well, let's just use TPM. I say enable recommended secure boot. This is for Windows. It does help to keep rootkits. It's not 100%. There was some malware, I think a year or two ago, that bypassed secure boot, and they had to push out a big update through Windows Update, and then it went to update the keys for secure boot. But anyway, that's a video for another time. And then choose unlock option. So by default, Windows will choose just TPM only, auto unlock. So as soon as you fire up your computer, it can detect, okay, TPM and secure boot are there. More secure is you can go into group policy and make sure it's using TPM plus PIN. The reason I bring this up is, let's say you're completely new to this. You don't understand what any of this is. Let's say you then go to update your BIOS, or for some reason you're going around and you're playing around in your settings and you're messing around with secure boot, you reset secure boot or you reset TPM. What that does is it causes, because BitLocker thinks that the computer's been tampered with and there could be malware, is it will go into something called recovery mode. And if you do not have your recovery key, it doesn't matter if you have your password, you will never get into your data again. It is gone forever. So they make you save a recovery key, and you've got to make sure that you have access to it. Where I'm going with this is basically what I was going and making sure do not restart until you've confirmed that you backed up your recovery key. Always do the hardware check. There's so much intricacies to encryption to make sure you're not losing your data. That's why I was saying just be careful with this stuff so you don't lose all of your data. The other thing real quick to keep in mind with this is, so for example, the Ryzen 3000 and 5000 series CPUs did have a vulnerability with them where if you do use the firmware TPM, which is fine, you can use it, it's not really a big deal, but take a look at this. Brute forcing the pin. You can, as far as I understand, this is not patchable. This is a permanent vulnerability that can never be taken out. So if you're going to use a pin on a Ryzen 3000 or 5000 series CPU, look at the brute force, time to brute force. Well, let's say you end up losing your hard drive for some reason, a bad actor gets a hold of it, and let's say you had a 10-character password. Well, if you had a firmware TPM, bad actor can use this to break your password in 34 minutes. Whereas over here with a dedicated TPM, which would be like a hardware, an actual chip that's added into your computer, 41 years. 20 characters goes up a lot, but still 2.1 years, I would say personally, is not great. This is just an example of where I was saying that if you're going to go down this path of privacy and security, there's a lot of intricacies to it. This is just something to be aware of. Anyway, let's move on. We're getting pretty close to being wrapped up here. Email and messaging. First thing I'll mention is email is not as secure as most people would assume that it is. If you are using Outlook, Hotmail, MSN, I'm guessing there's still probably a thing. AOL, I'm guessing they're probably still around. Gmail. These guys all have access to your email. They are all reading it. They're all upfront about doing this. Google in the past year or so has been adamant about using your emails to train AI and using it to feed into workflows. So for example, people can connect Gemini to their Google accounts, and if you get an email saying, hey, would you like to meet with me regarding this certain thing on this date and time? Well, some of it, some people are getting use out of it. Some people will set it up so that Gemini can then go to Google Calendar and say, oh, this person's available then. Let me go ahead and book this meeting automatically to save time. It's going to go back to, if you want to increase your privacy and security, it comes at the cost of convenience. If you're going to use email, just be aware if you're using the big tech providers, they read every email. They have access to everything that's in there. So what I would recommend is either Proton Mail or Tutanota are good alternatives to this problem. It is kind of picking up as a attack method again. I personally, on this YouTube channel, someone was trying to, this was probably 6 months ago, someone was trying to get me to use, and the email looked somewhat legit from a bird's eye view, where they were trying to get me to download some kind of a crypto wallet or piece of crypto software. It was an obvious scam, but the way that it was written, it to a new user, to someone who didn't have enough experience, it would probably pass as something that's legit. This is also, by the way, happening in DMs through Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. The problem with this stuff is companies are still following these bad practices. We have told people for years now, do not click links that show up in emails, and yet every time that you need to log into an account or you forgot a password or something, they will send an email saying, let's say you haven't logged into your account in a while, and they're reminding you, oh, well, you should log into your account to keep your account active. But then they'll have a link in there to click on. Well, why are we recommending people to avoid this stuff, but then we're still recommending people click on these links? That's just something that irritates me. But anyway, it's good practice to check for spoofed emails. Let me give you an example here of what I'm talking about when I say spoofed emails. So this is an example of an email. This came from, if I remember correctly, someone that I had reached out to. It was a potential client. Things did not work out, but this showed up in my email. I think I did a breakdown of this in one of my past videos, or maybe I didn't. I don't know. It's been a while since I had talked about this, but it came from what looked like a legitimate email. By the way, it was a legitimate email, but I checked to make sure, okay, well, this seems kind of odd that they're sending this. What happened in this case was a bad actor took over their real real email address, which is what made it look like it was coming from the real email. But if you want to check and see if you're getting a spoofed email, again, nothing's ever 100% certain or 100% secure. There are ways for bad actors to work around this. But let's say you get an email from what looks like Google, but you're not quite sure. There is a chance that if it is a malicious email and it somehow made it to your inbox, that you could catch it this way. There are these three things that are checked for anytime someone sets up a business email account and they're using it to send emails. They have to set up these three things, or generally their email gets put on a list to have all their emails get sent spam. Sender policy framework, domain keys identified mail, and domain messaging authentication, reporting, and conformance. The domain owner has to set all of these up on their email DNS settings, or their domain settings, their domain DNS settings to use their email. If they do not set this up, generally stuff just automatically goes to spam. But if you take a look at an email and you think, well, this seems odd, and you ever take a look and you see that any of these three has failed, that is almost certain sign that you have received a spoofed email, because there's no excuse for business owners to not have their emails with this stuff set up these days. I can make a video covering this in detail at a later point because there's a lot more to this aspect of email security, but there's something to look for. Encrypted messaging apps can be useful if you have people who are willing to use them. So for example, Signal used to be able to, I think on Android, if you wanted to send just an SMS message to somebody else, meaning they weren't using Signal, but you just wanted to send them a text, you could do that within Signal. You didn't have the encryption benefits. The problem with these is they need more of a user base to get more adoption, but more and more people are starting to use them. Signal is ideal. Particularly with Signal, you have things like safety numbers, user IDs, increased privacy protection. So like for a safety number, for example, if you're not familiar with this and you're like, oh, well, I want to use Signal. Let's say you're communicating with a friend frequently and you guys do it through Signal. And one day you wake up and you are like, oh, I want to send him a message. And it says, John's safety number has changed. That could be a sign that they deleted the app and reinstalled it. Could be a sign that they installed it on a different phone, or it could be a sign that a malicious actor, maybe they did a SIM swap on a phone, they hijacked the phone number, and now they're using Signal on that phone and they are eavesdropping on all the communications. There are certain features that Signal has that are useful. That's just some of them. But anyway, we can get more into that later. And we are wrapping up here. Web browsers, I'll keep this quick. The ones that I recommend are Firefox if you're going to harden it. Brave, Mullvad browser is still my number one choice. After a couple of years of using it at this point, still my number one choice. LibreWolf, there's some others that are out there. Ladybird is one. There's been a lot of drama going on lately with Google Chrome potentially having to sell, but then it's being used for a lot more data collection. Manifest version 3 causing issues with ad blockers. Then there's been a lot of controversy with Firefox. Like for example, they force telemetry by default when you install the browser. There is a new browser being worked on. I think it's called Ladybird, where this browser will be able to be used just like any other browser, but it is written completely from scratch. It looks promising. It might be good. We'll see, but that's just something to keep an eye on. Look for whenever you're using it. So like Firefox, for example, make sure you are using uBlock Origin. It blocks a lot more than you might think. It blocks ads, but it can also block a lot of malware. It can block malvertising, which has been a pretty significant problem. Just some things to be aware of there. Let's go and wrap this up. This video has been going on for a long time now. Here are some tools and resources. VirusTotal. If you have a file that you think is suspicious, you could run it through VirusTotal. This doesn't catch everything. Just be aware of that. It can also scan links to see if there might be malware hiding on a website. What I have noticed is that URL scan typically is better for scanning websites than VirusTotal, but you can run them together and potentially one can catch something that the other would miss. The Hacker News, this is one of multiple websites you could check out. Just kind of has stuff going into cyber topics. It's a good one. Yourbias.is. This is a list of cognitive biases. It doesn't go into super detail on each one, but it kind of gives you a rough overview. If you want to learn more on some of these topics, Dangerous Personalities by retired FBI agent Joe Navarro, The Puzzle Palace. This is like Dangerous Personalities is what it sounds like, people that you have to be careful of and the type of mindset they have. The Puzzle Palace is a history of the NSA from the 40s when it was still, I think, the Army Signal Corps up until the book was published, which I think was around 1982. This gives you a pretty good idea of what government agencies are capable of. And then Sandworm is about the I think it was about the WannaCry or the NotPetya ransomware that crashed a large part of business infrastructure, like logistic stuff. It crashed, I think, a lot of power plants in Eastern Europe, and then it took down the Maersk shipping system, like all the big container ships that run across the oceans, infected their computers. Sandworm's a pretty interesting read. It's not super technical, but it would give you an idea of how some of this stuff can take over computers. Wireshark, if you've never analyzed network traffic before, Wireshark is a good way to get started. Palo Alto Unit 42 is a good security research team. Every once in a while, they will do a detailed report on certain attacks that happen. There's others that are out there. Unit 42 is a pretty good one, though. And the PC Security Channel. This is Leo. He's got a solid channel. He's still, as far as I know, is running tests for antivirus software. So if you want to know, well, how does Bitdefender do against 5,000 viruses? You can go to his channel and he gives you an explanation of that. Anyway, that is basically the video summed up. There will be a PDF or a Google Doc linked down in the description and in the comment section. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate it. This has been a long one, and I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this. I appreciate the support as always, and I'll see you in the next one.